What if I told you that in 2025, millions of Britons could lose their homes, not because they did anything wrong, but because of new laws most people don't even know exist, from hidden tax traps to eviction fast tracks and crushing housing cuts. These rules could affect anyone: renters, homeowners, even pensioners. Stay with me, because by the time we reach law number 10, you'll see how close this crisis really is and why no one is safe. Number 1. Stricter eviction laws. The year 2025 brings with it a law that could dramatically reshape the balance between landlords and tenants in Britain. Under the new stricter eviction rules, landlords will be able to remove tenants for even minor breaches of rental agreements, such as late rent payments, noise complaints, or small maintenance issues. What once required lengthy court hearings and multiple warnings is now being pushed through as a fast-track eviction system, with cases decided in weeks rather than months. This shift is framed as a way to give landlords greater control over their property, but in reality, it places millions of renters at risk of suddenly losing the roof over their heads without sufficient time to prepare or relocate. For many households, this change comes at a time when financial instability is already at its peak. Rising food prices, higher energy bills, and growing mortgage costs have stretched budgets to breaking point. Tenants who previously had some leeway to catch up on payments will now find themselves evicted after just a short delay. Families with children, elderly residents, and single parents are the ones most exposed to these rules, as their ability to quickly secure alternative housing is already limited. The ripple effect will not only be felt by tenants, but will also strain local councils, charities, and shelters, as the number of eviction cases surges across the country. Perhaps the most worrying aspect of this law is its potential to destabilize entire communities. Long-term tenants, who once contributed stability and continuity to neighborhoods, may now face constant uncertainty about their housing status. Schools could see children uprooted mid-year, employers could lose workers forced to relocate, and local networks of care among neighbors could collapse under the weight of mass eviction. By handing landlords more authority without equally strengthening tenant protections, the law risks creating a climate of housing insecurity unlike anything Britain has faced in recent decades. The message is clear: even those who have lived in their homes for years are no longer guaranteed security, and many will be left wondering whether each month might be their last in the place they call home. Number 2. Mortgage default penalties. A second law coming into effect in 2025 focuses on mortgage repayment rules, and it has the potential to devastate millions of British homeowners. The legislation gives banks and financial institutions unprecedented power to repossess properties after only a short period of missed payments. Traditionally, borrowers who fell behind on their mortgage could negotiate payment plans or rely on grace periods to recover. Now, under these tighter regulations, a single default may trigger accelerated repossession proceedings. For families already stretched by soaring interest rates, this means the margin for error is razor thin, and the risk of losing one's home becomes a very real possibility. The pressure is mounting as economic conditions grow harsher. Interest rates have climbed steadily, leaving households paying hundreds more each month on their mortgages. At the same time, wage growth remains stagnant, and the rising cost of daily essentials continues to erode disposable income. For many middle-class families, missing one or two payments is no longer an unlikely event, but a looming threat. What makes this law even more concerning is how it removes layers of protection that once acted as a buffer. Banks are not required to offer flexible repayment terms, and borrowers will struggle to access the kind of legal aid that could previously delay repossessions. Home ownership, once considered a pillar of financial stability, may soon become a fragile dream that collapses with a single financial setback. This law is expected to create a wave of forced relocations across both urban and rural Britain. Communities that once prided themselves on stability may see families displaced at alarming rates, leaving behind empty houses and broken neighborhood ties. Older homeowners who refinance their properties to cope with the rising cost of living are particularly vulnerable, as even a small shortfall could result in the loss of homes they have lived in for decades. By empowering financial institutions while weakening borrower protections, the government has created an environment where repossession becomes the default response to hardship. Instead of safeguarding citizens during uncertain times, this law may open the door to mass displacement and a deepening housing crisis in Number 3. Council tax enforcement. A third law emerging in 2025 targets unpaid council tax, giving local authorities far greater powers to recover debt through property seizure. Previously, councils relied on payment plans, court orders, or wage deductions to handle arrears. Now, under the new legislation, if residents fail to pay within a shortened time frame, councils can move directly to reclaim property or enforce repossession orders. This represents a profound shift in how local taxation is collected, effectively turning late payment into a pathway toward homelessness. Low-income families, pensioners on fixed incomes, and households already balancing high rents or mortgages are the ones most exposed to these harsh measures. The timing of this law could not be worse, with food and utility costs rising sharply. Thousands of families are struggling to prioritize bills. Many face impossible choices: heat their homes, buy groceries, or pay council tax on time. For the elderly, particularly those living alone, these decisions are often made under enormous stress. Missing even one cycle of payments now carries severe consequences, as councils are not required to consider personal hardship in the same way they once did. The result is a system that treats struggling citizens as defaulters rather than people in need of support. Charities and advocacy groups are already warning that this approach will lead to a surge in evictions and an overwhelmed housing assistance sector. Beyond individual households, the new enforcement rules may destabilize entire communities. Families facing council tax repossession will be forced to vacate homes they may have lived in for generations, breaking neighborhood bonds and straining local services. The psychological toll is equally significant, as residents live under constant fear of losing their homes over relatively small amounts of unpaid tax. By prioritizing aggressive collection tactics, the law risks punishing the most vulnerable instead of addressing systemic affordability issues. Britain may soon witness neighborhoods hollowed out by repossessions, not because people refuse to contribute, but because survival in 2025 has become an impossible equation. Number 4. Rent cap rollbacks. The fourth major change in 2025 strikes directly at the heart of Britain's rental market: the rollback of rent caps. For several years, temporary rent controls were introduced to shield tenants from steep increases during a period of economic turbulence. These protections acted as a safety net, ensuring families, students, and pensioners could remain in their homes despite rising demand and dwindling supply. With the removal of these measures, landlords now have full freedom to raise rents without restriction. In areas where demand already far exceeds supply, this means tenants could see sudden, unaffordable hikes that leave them with no choice but to vacate. For many households, the return of unchecked rent increases signals the beginning of widespread displacement. The impact of this rollback is particularly severe in large cities like London, Manchester, and Birmingham, where rents were already consuming a significant portion of household income. Tenants who once spent 40% of their earnings on rent may now face demands for half or even more of their monthly wages. Families with children are especially vulnerable, as moving often means leaving schools, jobs, and long-standing community ties behind. Elderly renters, many of whom live on fixed pensions, have even fewer options. Without caps, landlords can legally double or triple rents overnight, forcing seniors to abandon the places they have called home for decades. While the government argues that removing rent controls will encourage new investment in housing, critics warn that the immediate result will be a tidal wave of evictions. The broader social consequences of this change are alarming. Homelessness charities are preparing for a surge in demand, as countless renters will be unable to meet rising costs. Employers may struggle to retain staff if workers are priced out of commuting distance. Communities could fragment as long-time residents are replaced by higher-income tenants, accelerating gentrification and erasing cultural identity. By removing the only barrier that kept rents somewhat stable, the rollback law has effectively handed landlords unchecked power while leaving millions of Britons with no protection. For countless families, 2025 may mark the year they are permanently driven out of the rental market. Number 5. Vacancy and under-occupancy fines. The fifth law introduced in 2025 aims to address Britain's housing shortage by targeting what lawmakers call under-occupied homes. Under this new regulation, households deemed to be living in properties larger than their needs may face heavy fines. For example, A retired couple living in a 3-bedroom house could be penalized if officials determine that the extra rooms are unused. The same applies to families who cannot fill every bedroom according to government-defined standards. If the fines go unpaid, councils are empowered to enforce eviction or push residents to downsize. While the law is presented as a way to free up housing stock for younger generations, the practical result is that countless older Britons may be driven from the homes they have lived in for decades. The financial strain of these fines is expected to be immense. Pensioners on fixed incomes already struggling with higher energy bills and rising food prices may not be able to afford the new penalties. Many will be forced to make heartbreaking decisions, selling their homes, leaving long-established neighborhoods, or moving into smaller, unfamiliar flats. Families too may be affected, particularly those who keep spare rooms for visiting relatives, blended households, or children who attend university but still live at home. Part-time. What was once considered normal family life could now be judged as inefficient use of property, placing emotional and financial pressure on households across the country. The broader consequences of this law are deeply unsettling. Communities risk losing long-time residents as older homeowners are pressured out, fracturing the very social fabric that holds neighborhoods together. Family traditions of passing down homes through generations could collapse, replaced by constant turnover and instability. At the same time, the housing shortage may not even improve, as many properties taken through fines could end up sold to investors rather than local families. Instead of solving the housing crisis, this measure may only worsen feelings of insecurity and resentment. By treating spare rooms as wasted resources, the government risks alienating millions of citizens and transforming the concept of homeownership from a right into a conditional privilege. Number 6. Foreign investment rules. The 6th law of 2025 reshapes Britain's housing market by expanding loopholes that allow foreign investors to purchase property with minimal restrictions. For years, overseas buyers have been drawn to the UK housing sector as a safe investment, often leaving homes empty or using them solely as financial assets. Now, under the updated rules, these investors face fewer barriers, opening the door to mass acquisitions of residential properties. While the government frames this as a way to attract international capital, the reality is that local buyers are being systematically priced out. Families hoping to buy their first homes may find themselves outbid by investors who can pay in cash, driving prices far beyond the reach of ordinary Britons. This law has immediate consequences for urban areas already under pressure. In London, Manchester, and Edinburgh, entire blocks of flats are being bought in bulk by foreign funds and corporations, often left unoccupied while their value appreciates. For local residents, the effect is twofold: rising property prices and dwindling availability. Renters are also hit hard, as landlords competing with international buyers feel emboldened to increase rents in line with inflated property values. For younger generations, the dream of homeownership slips further away, while older homeowners risk being surrounded by empty, lifeless neighborhoods where community once thrived. Instead of addressing the housing shortage, the new rules effectively turn homes into commodities traded on a global scale. The wider implications stretch beyond affordability. As more properties fall into the hands of absentee owners, local councils lose the stability of long-term residents and face declining engagement in community life. Schools, shops, and public services suffer when families are displaced or priced out. Critics argue that this law prioritizes financial speculation over human need, creating a system where housing exists primarily as a tool for profit. By granting foreign investors greater freedom while offering no protection for domestic buyers, the government has risked deepening the housing divide. For millions of Britons, 2025 may be remembered as the year when their right to a home was overshadowed by global capital, leaving them with fewer choices and greater uncertainty than ever before. Number 7. Universal credit housing cuts. The 7th law shaking Britain in 2025 directly affects those relying on universal credit to keep a roof over their heads. Housing support, once considered a lifeline for struggling families, is being sharply reduced under new regulations. Claimants will now receive significantly less assistance toward rent, regardless of rising market prices. For many, this cut means their benefit will no longer cover even half of the rent they owe. Families living paycheck to paycheck, single parents, and disabled residents who already rely heavily on this support are left in a precarious position. Without the cushion of full housing benefit, eviction becomes a looming reality for thousands. The situation is made worse by the fact that rent prices continue to rise in nearly every region of the country. Tenants depending on universal credit are finding themselves with growing shortfalls each month, forced to choose between paying their landlord and covering other essentials like food, heating, or transportation. For households already juggling debt, this shortfall quickly spirals into arrears, and landlords empowered by other 2025 laws now have faster legal routes to eviction. Families with children are especially at risk, as losing housing support almost guarantees displacement. Shelters, already stretched thin, warn that they will be unable to cope with the surge in need caused by these cuts. Beyond the immediate financial crisis, the social costs of this policy are profound. Children uprooted from their homes will face disruptions in education and community life, while parents endure the constant anxiety of trying to secure shelter. Neighborhoods may see an increase in visible homelessness, as those unable to keep up with rent are forced onto the street. Critics argue that by reducing housing support during a period of record inflation and stagnant wages, the government is effectively pushing vulnerable people into destitution. Instead of addressing the root causes of the housing crisis, these cuts risk creating an innate class of citizens for whom stable housing is permanently out of reach. In 2025, universal credit no longer represents security, but rather a broken promise that leaves millions of Britons exposed to homelessness. Number 8. New immigration housing clauses. The 8th law, introduced in 2025, directly targets migrants and their access to housing, creating stricter residency requirements that could displace hundreds of thousands. Under the new clauses, migrants must prove that their accommodation meets specific government-set standards, including minimum space requirements and limits on shared living arrangements. Homes with multiple families or individuals sharing rooms are now considered unsuitable, even if residents are comfortable with their arrangements. Failure to comply can result in penalties, eviction orders, or even deportation in extreme cases. For migrant families who rely on affordable, shared housing to survive in expensive cities, this law represents an existential threat to their stability. The effect of these clauses is especially harsh for low-income workers who form the backbone of sectors like healthcare, construction, and hospitality. Many of them live in overcrowded housing not by choice, but by necessity, given the high cost of rent across the country. By outlawing these arrangements, the law forces families to seek larger, more expensive properties they simply cannot afford. This not only places them at risk of eviction, but also increases the likelihood of exploitation, as some landlords may inflate prices for properties that meet the new criteria. Children of migrant families are particularly vulnerable, facing sudden displacement from their schools and communities if their parents cannot meet the stricter housing rules. Beyond the immediate hardship, the broader consequences of these clauses ripple through society. Communities with long-established migrant populations may see sudden breaks as families are forced to leave or relocate far away. Employers, already struggling with labor shortages, could find their workforce destabilized if workers lose housing and must return to their countries of origin. Human rights advocates argue that the policy unfairly stigmatizes migrants by holding them to higher standards than British citizens, effectively treating housing as a privilege tied to immigration status rather than a basic human need. By introducing these clauses, the government risks not only displacing thousands, but also fueling division and resentment in already fragile communities. For many migrants in 2025, the right to live and work in Britain is no longer secure if their housing fails to pass the government's new Number 9. Green energy compliance. The 9th law in 2025 focuses on mandatory green energy upgrades for residential properties, a policy designed to meet Britain's environmental targets, but one that threatens the housing security of millions. Under this regulation, homeowners and landlords are required to upgrade insulation, replace outdated heating systems, and install energy-efficient technologies such as heat pumps or solar panels. While the goal is to reduce carbon emissions, the costs are staggering. Families who cannot afford the tens of thousands of pounds required for upgrades may face heavy fines, and in extreme cases, their homes could be deemed unfit for habitation. Those unable to comply risk losing their properties altogether. The financial impact is particularly severe for elderly homeowners and low-income households, Many pensioners live in older properties that require extensive retrofitting, yet they lack the savings to cover such upgrades. Instead of receiving adequate subsidies or phased support, these residents now face impossible choices: take on crushing debt, attempt to sell their homes under pressure, or risk government action for non-compliance. Landlords, too, are passing the cost of upgrades onto tenants through rent hikes, leaving renters trapped in an even more precarious situation. The law, while presented as environmentally necessary, is criticised for failing to account for the economic realities facing ordinary Britons. Beyond the financial strain, the broader consequences of this policy may undermine both social stability and public trust. Entire neighbourhoods of older housing stock could be targeted for enforcement, forcing long-time residents out and opening the door for developers or speculators. Communities risk losing cohesion, as families are uprooted not because of misconduct, but because they could not afford to modernise their homes fast enough. Critics argue that while sustainability is crucial, this law effectively weaponises green policy against the most vulnerable. Instead of promoting fairness, it risks creating a two-tier housing system where only the wealthy can afford to comply and remain secure, while millions face eviction cloaked in the language of climate responsibility. For countless Britons, 2025 may mark the year when environmental goals collided head-on with the right to stay in their own homes. Number 10. Emergency redevelopment orders. The 10th law in 2025 introduces sweeping emergency redevelopment powers, allowing the government to clear entire neighbourhoods for infrastructure or urban renewal projects with minimal notice. Unlike previous compulsory purchase schemes that required long consultations and fair compensation, these new orders can be executed rapidly, leaving residents with little time to contest or prepare. Families may be forced to vacate homes they have owned for decades, often receiving payouts far below market value. Authorities justify the measure by citing the urgent need for housing, transport links, and green spaces. But for many Britons, the reality is blunt. They are being displaced to make way for projects that prioritise profit and political image over community stability. The human cost of these orders is immense. Entire communities face fragmentation as streets, schools, and local shops are swept away in the name of progress. Elderly residents who have spent their lives in the same neighbourhood are at risk of losing not only their homes, but also their support networks of neighbours and friends. Families with children face sudden relocations, disrupting education and creating long commutes for working parents. Tenants are often left with even fewer protections, receiving minimal compensation or temporary housing miles away from their jobs. The psychological toll is equally severe, as residents live with the constant fear that their homes may be next on the government's redevelopment list. The broader implications are deeply troubling for Britain's housing landscape. While officials argue that redevelopment will improve cities, critics warn it accelerates gentrification, pushing out lower and middle-income households to make space for luxury flats and commercial projects. Local culture and history risk being erased as heritage buildings are demolished in favour of high-rise developments marketed to wealthy investors. Instead of addressing the housing crisis, these orders may create more displacement and insecurity, hollowing out communities and replacing them with transient, unaffordable housing. For millions of Britons, emergency redevelopment is not about renewal. It is about being uprooted and cast aside, all under the guise of modernisation. The 10 laws of 2025 reveal a troubling reality. Housing in Britain is no longer the secure foundation it once was. From fast-track evictions to harsh mortgage penalties, from council tax crackdowns to redevelopment orders, each measure chips away at the stability millions depend on. Families, pensioners, renters, and even long-time homeowners now face the constant fear of losing their homes, not through personal failure, but through a system designed to prioritise financial gain and rapid policy shifts over human security. The ripple effects go far beyond individuals, reshaping communities, displacing children from schools, and eroding the sense of belonging that makes a neighbourhood more than just a collection of houses. What stands out most is how these laws overlap, creating a perfect storm where ordinary Britons are left more vulnerable than ever before. Housing insecurity is no longer a distant issue. It is unfolding here and now, with consequences that will be felt for generations. Understanding these changes is the first step in preparing for what lies ahead, because awareness may be the only shield against a system that is moving faster than people can react. And if you value content like this, please support us by subscribing with just one click. Don't miss our previous videos, where we uncover more truths that others won't tell you.